My name is Jack Bobo. I am the chair of this session today, and I am also the director of the Food Systems Institute at the University of Nottingham in the UK. It's a delight for me to be here with you today, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation with our distinguished panelist and keynote. Uh, the session today, Unlocking the Competitive and Sustainable Agriculture Through Plant Breeding Innovation. And I'm going to provide a couple of remarks before we turn it over to our keynote. This webinar is supported by the American Seed Trade Association, ASTA, and Euroseeds. We'll be discussing the potential real-life applications and benefits of plant breeding innovation, also known as PBI, to farmers, consumers, and the planet, and what's really needed in order to realize this potential. Plant breeding innovation, including new genomic techniques, will contribute to a more sustainable, resilient, nutritious, and competitive agricultural sector, both on this side of the Atlantic and in the United States. By involving industry experts from outside of Europe, as well as European scientists and farmers, the event will draw attention to the need for transatlantic collaboration in order to achieve this goal. That's what we're going to talk about today, but I want to spend at least a couple of minutes talking about the context for this conversation. Why does this conversation matter so much? Now, you'll be familiar with many of the statistics, but I still think it's worth saying 40% of all the land on Earth that could be used for agriculture is already being used for agriculture today. The amount of cropland is the size of South America, the amount of pasture land is the size of Africa. So in terms of land, there's just nothing more important than agriculture. If we were to talk about freshwater, 70% of all freshwater goes to agriculture. And then in terms of climate change, 10 to 15% of greenhouse gases come from agriculture, another 10 to 15% from deforestation, 80% of which is driven by agriculture. That's almost as much as energy, and it's more than anything else. So we have tremendous pressure on the planet from agricultural production today, and we're going to be adding another 1.5 to 2 billion people to the planet by 2050. So those challenges are going to get worse. But we're also confronted with a more variable planet. Some places are drier, some places are wetter, more inconsistency in the weather. And so we have tremendous challenges. And of course, we have 800 million people who will go to bed hungry today. So we're not feeding the people that we have, let alone being prepared to feed a growing planet. And so, with all of those challenges in mind, I think that it's easy to often look at agriculture and think about our food system as broken. But I think it's also important that we recognize where we've come from. Yes, 10% of the people on the planet will go to bed hungry today, but 30 years ago, 20% of all the people on the planet would have been going to bed hungry. 60 years ago, 30% of all the people on the planet would have been going to bed hungry. That's what innovation has helped. Childhood mortality is at the lowest point in all of human history. If we were farming today with 1960s technology, we would need 1 billion additional hectares of land to produce the food we do. That's equal to more than a quarter of all the forest on the planet. They only exist because of agricultural innovation. And so that's the context. Yes, there are tremendous challenges, but we also have a history and record of success in delivering innovations. And so, with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first keynote speaker to provide some comments. Jens Boyen is the, let's see, sorry about that, is the plant health attaché for the permanent representation of Belgium to the European Union. And of course, Belgium is in the presidency. We're going to keep the introduction short. And so, Jens, I'd like to turn it over to you to make some remarks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for giving me the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome today. The people following from Belgium can take that quite literally, as it seems like summer has finally reached us. It's a great pleasure to be here, to be able to share some of my insights on plant breeding innovation, and of course, the negotiations on the proposal on plants obtained by certain new genomic techniques in the EU. Now, for me, this will be the last time I can use my presidency superpower of speaking from the whole council's perspective, because as of next week, we will hand over our role as an honest broker to our Hungarian colleagues. and I'm sure they will do everything in their power to make agriculture in the EU great again. Now, as you know, plant breeding innovation has the potential to revolutionize agriculture on a global scale. The recent advancements have given us the potential to foster a more competitive and a more sustainable agricultural sector, which can significantly benefit farmers, consumers, and the environment. And indeed, there are many countries today who are already embracing NGTs. Now in the EU, the Commission proposal on NGT, as published under the Spanish presidency, was the first step to catch up with these countries. This regulation aims for an appropriate regulatory oversight for the concerned plant products, ensuring a high level of protection of human and animal health and the environment. It also would enable innovation and contribution of safe new genomic techniques to the objectives of the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy. Our Spanish colleagues have been very ambitious, and they managed to present a well-balanced text by the end of their presidency. And when we took over in January, we hit the ground running, and we really prioritized this file from the beginning. We were dedicated to advancing it as far as possible so that farmers can use these tools to cope with climate change and maintaining their competitiveness all the while. And over the past several months, the negotiations have been focused on the outstanding issue of intellectual property rights for plants obtained with NGTs. Now, our goal was to find a creative solution that ensures the access for all growers and farmers on fair and reasonable terms, while still encouraging innovation. Despite the broad support, we did not achieve a qualified majority due to the very different and vast variety of positions from member states. The negotiations have highlighted the complexity of balancing innovation with fair access and regulatory clarity. And there are still many open questions in this regard, which will have to be answered by the Hungarian presidency. So I wish them good luck in advancing further on these discussions. Now, I've seen in today's program an impressive array of experts from both sides of the Atlantic to share their insights and their experiences. And I'm confident that these discussions will be enlightening and that they will pave the way for future advancements in plant breeding, hopefully even in the EU. In closing, I would just like to thank the organizers, the American Seed Trading Associations and Euroseeds for bringing us together for this important dialogue. And let us use these discussions as building blocks to build a platform where innovative agricultural practices can thrive, ensuring a sustainable and prosperous world for the generations to come. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to today's discussions.
Thank you. And I think you've agreed to stay for a couple of questions and then stay for until about 4:30. I very much appreciate that. So let's just kick off with this first question of what do you think the impact of this delay is on EU ag competitiveness and also the ability to meet the sustainability goals that are in the Farm to Fork strategy and the Green Deal? So what does this all mean for our audience?
Well, as I said, we took a first step in the EU with this proposal, or the Commission took the first step. An additional step has been set by the Parliament. They are ready for negotiations. It's the so-called trilogue negotiations with the Council as soon as we have a mandate. Now, the rest of the world is already developing these NGTs, already using them on the fields. So it does mean a delay for our farmers to reach the same level of productivity and the ability to cope with climate change compared to the rest of the world. So I wouldn't say it's a step back, but it's certainly a delay to make our farmers as competitive as the rest of the world.
And so you mentioned the rest of the world and what's happening. I've just returned from Thailand and Singapore, where I've been having conversations over NGTs as well. One of the things that struck me is that there's progress in a lot of different parts in the world that we didn't see when it came to genetically engineered crops. One of the countries that has led the way with gene editing is Japan, a country that was, very reluctant when it came to some of these other technologies and has been producing products with real consumer facing traits. And so I'm just wondering what impact does the rest of the world sort of advancing have on these negotiations? Does that make it easier to move forward? Does it create a competitive challenge to the question, or does it create opportunity?
Well, the question of competitiveness is certainly one that we are also exploring during the negotiations in the EU. It's a very valid argument for a lot of member states to carry on with the negotiations and to come to compromise as soon as possible. But in the EU, we also have the highest standards, safety standards for consumers. There has been a lot of talk about the precaution principle. Some member states feel like we don't know enough about these new techniques and their potential impacts. It has been proven very difficult to distinguish these NGT plants from GMO plants. And there's a big public debate in the EU from the consumers' perspectives that is also delaying the negotiations.
Right. And suppose there's also a challenge distinguishing them just from traditional plant breeding, which to some extent suggests that there aren't that many differences. But these are certainly complex questions, and I think we all agree that food safety comes first, and we want consumers to have confidence in the food supply. So, are there things that the different communities that are participating in this, either on the panel or in the audience, can be doing to make their perspective and views heard? Should we be reaching out to policymakers? Should we be, making our different perspectives and desires known? What are some effective ways of engaging on this topic?
Well, engaging with policymakers, of course, is a very good first step. I think we can learn a lot from stakeholders when they share their views on the ongoing negotiations. But in a more broad perspective, I think there are a lot of technicalities to the NGT proposal as published by the Commission, but it remains a main question: why are NGTs different from GMOs? And that is the question on which you and us, we can raise awareness to really distinguish these two totally different things towards the public, towards farmers, so that they will be willing to consume them, the farmers will be willing to use them on their fields, and that can bring us quite far.
Yeah, I think that ability to have an impact, I think when we think about the farm to fork strategy, if it was fully implemented as it was originally prepared, would lead to a 15% reduction in food production in Europe. And, that's really outsourcing the environmental impact of agricultural production in the EU. I think many see these new innovations as a way of both reducing the impact of agriculture, but also maintaining that production so that we don't outsource our problem to the rest of the world. So I think that there's at least a potential for addressing some of our environmental goals and our production goals as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a very good point. These two things really go hand in hand. This proposal has been associated with the Green Deal because indeed it has a potential to help farmers cope with climate change, but it's also very much about competitiveness and the yield of the plants, and that's it's very important that those two go hand in hand.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your sticking around to hear some of the comments that follow. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Jim Radke, who's the Senior Vice President for Product Development for Cibus. Jim, please take it away.
Thanks, Jack, and good afternoon to all. I work for Cibus, small company involving developing traits in plants using gene editing. I'm a plant breeder with experience breeding corn and rapeseed. The mission of a person working in plant breeding is to develop new plant hybrids or varieties that meet the needs of growers and consumers. This includes developing lines that have better performance, like higher yield and standability, along with improved nutritional quality. Along with that, the plants must be protected from different stresses that occur during the growing season, including biological challenges like diseases and insects, but also non-biological environmental stresses like excessive heat and drought. As the environment continues to change, the stresses continue to increase, and the breeder must be able to respond to them. With ever-increasing demands for food security and climate resilience, there's pressure on plant breeders to develop new varieties faster and more efficiently than has been possible before. This requires access to new technologies and the incentives to invest in using them. One tool that has recently come available for the breeder is gene editing, also called New Genomic Techniques, or NGTs. The beauty of these new techniques is they're based on old techniques that the breeders have used safely for over 100 years. Small changes to the plant's DNA, called mutations, have occurred naturally over many years or can be induced using chemicals or radiation. These have resulted in improvements like reduced stature wheat, seedless citrus, oil and starch quality changes, and many others. Plants from breeding programs using these techniques have been safely consumed for many years. NGTs are new technologies that can be used to develop the same kind of traits, but faster and with better precision. They can also be used more easily with lower cost in a broad range of crops, not just the highest acreage crops. To be able to respond faster to the changing environment is critical to deliver a sustainable food supply to consumers. Plants developed using NGTs are not distinguishable from those developed using currently accepted mutation breeding approaches. This is because the changes which can be made using NGTs could also occur in nature. The difference is simply that the application of NGTs allows the breeder to make those changes faster and more accurately than before. This tool allows breeders to focus on selection for performance and adaptation, and then use NGTs to add other traits that may be desired for a variety or hybrid to be best adapted to specific growing conditions. It's also important that countries around the world are in basic agreement on the acceptance of plants developed using NGTs to enable global trade. There appears to be a growing consensus among policymakers worldwide that varieties developed with the help of NGTs should be regulated the same way as conventional varieties. This is because NGTs introduce genetic changes that are identical to those that arise between every generation in conventional breeding. With this in mind, it's important to understand that traits developed using NGTs could not reliably be distinguished from those traits which occurred naturally or those already accepted mutation breeding technologies. This creates a challenging situation for global trade, since without the ability to unequivocally detect those traits, it is not practical to establish a separate regulatory process for NGTs. One concern people have raised is access to new technologies and companies using patenting to prevent others from using the technologies. Companies that develop new technologies must be able to protect their investments. Otherwise, development of new items will not be possible, and it will affect decisions that are made, such as access to new traits that could be valuable for the European grower. Two new traits Cibus is developing for rapeseed are reduction of pod shatter and resistance to sclerotinia. Reducing pod shatter will allow European farmers to increase the productivity of their land, and resistance to sclerotinia should have the added benefit of reduction in the use of pesticides on the crop. Both will contribute to the economic security for the European farmers. As a small company, Cibus has an approach that focuses on access to the traits that are developed. Our desire is to have our traits on the maximum number of hectares possible. What that means is that we will work with many different breeders, large and small, so that their most elite lines can be edited by Cibus and will carry Cibus-developed traits. The breeders can focus on developing new varieties, and those elite varieties can then be edited to carry traits they want to add to their lines. This is a win for Cibus, the breeding companies, growers, and ultimately for consumers. Finally, the plant breeder has done an excellent job for many decades in providing new plants to meet consumer needs. They have taken advantage of new technologies such as genetic markers, interspecific crosses, speed breeding, and others to speed development of new varieties to meet grower and consumer needs. Moving to quickly speed up the final regulatory process is essential for the development of the technologies and application of those technologies, and will allow Europe to join much of the rest of the world. Use of NGTs is simply another tool in the breeder's toolbox, which allows for rapid development of new plant varieties to meet the needs of a growing global population and an ever-changing environment. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. And I have lots of questions. I just love the mutant variety database, things that consumers just haven't really thought about and yet are considered completely normal. I was just checking, and I think there are 3,300 varieties on that database, and yet, nobody has any concerns about that. And it's mostly because they don't know about it. And so let me turn now to Christina Chonga, who's the Deputy Managing Director, the Forum of Professional Farmers and Processors from Romania. I think it's just terrific that we have a farmer representation here on this panel. I think too often events like this don't include them, and I think their voice is just critical as we see across Europe today. So with that, over to you, Christina.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, depending where we are, one or the other side of the ocean. I'm a policy economist with the experience with over 30 years of experience in agriculture, both in the private and public sector. And for more than 6 years now, I work for a farmer organization, for a professional farmer organization, or if you want, for an organization of professional farmers. Let's put it better this way. And therefore, what I'm going to say now perhaps does not reflect a global view of farmers. It's more the view of my organization. We had great hopes from NGTs as farmers, and we consider that providing farmers with tools to increase productivity or reach the same level of production with a low impact on the environment is vital. The use of advanced biotechnologies represents a major opportunity for food production, and the farming sector cannot afford to miss it. Farmers in general, and in this context, referring to the Romanian farmers, need advanced germplasm to fight pests, blight, and abiotic stresses like drought and other effects of climate change. Accelerating innovation in agriculture is crucial against the backdrop of climate change anticipated in Europe, and we already witness this. For instance, in Romania, we have 5 years of drought out of 6 recently. Therefore, these advances provide means, we believe, to break this agriculture environment vicious cycle. They would allow reduction in agriculture's footprint over environment and overcome the effects produced by environmental changes upon food systems, contributing to farmers' adaptability and resilience. Because yes, indeed, it is about equipping farmers with means to decrease their environmental footprint, but at the same time allow them to be competitive in the global marketplace. Therefore, I want to express there the hope that the European Union embraces these technologies and recognizes the need for a revolutionary approach to address the urgent issues faced by the European agricultural sector. And needless to recall, in this context, the protests, the movements, the farmer protests that occurred in 17 member states since the beginning of this calendar year. Farmers feel this stretch. They are required to produce more with less, and for this reason they need means to achieve this. According to the official data of the European Commission, the cost of conventional breeding ranks between 2 to 3 million euros per variety or hybrid. On the other hand, if the use of NGT is accepted, the costs would be reduced to approximately 500,000 euros per variety or hybrid. Therefore, we see here a great potential to reduce production costs, which is particularly important in this environment of high inflationary pressures. Last but not least, I would say that we believe as farmers that developers of new technology should be protected and rewarded. There is already a legislation regarding the intellectual property rights in Europe. And if this is the case, we don't see any reason why the NGTs should have a different regime. This is the only way to encourage breeders, researchers to continue their work and come up with new valuable products to the market. There is no other way, and varieties obtained through conventional breeding or mutagenesis can be patented, or otherwise be protected under different forms in the European Union. Again, I'm asking, why should NGT have a different regime? Last but not least, I would like to say that we should weigh carefully the balance between the innovation principle and the precautionary principle, and that NGTs have a huge potential, we believe, for they are not a silver bullet for sure, but they are a very, very valuable tool in our toolbox as farmers, and I believe they have potential, including for organic agriculture. I know this is a sensitive issue. I know that it may be taken separately. There is a huge debate around, but from all standpoints, we should focus on science rather than ideology, and we should embrace solutions that allow us to be more productive, more friendly to the environment, and more competitive. That would be all from me at this point. I'm certainly eager to listen to what the scientists have to say within this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate those remarks. And I hope we can come back to some of the questions that you posed for the rest of the panelists as well. But now I'd like to turn it over to Patricia Gran, researcher in seed technology at Wageningen University. Please take it away. Oh, and while Patricia's speaking, I would encourage everybody to be thinking about questions and go ahead and put those into the chat. And that way we'll have a robust conversation later on. So tough questions are appreciated. Patricia.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to first thank the American Seed Trade Association and Euroseeds for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Well, my name is Patricia Gran, and I'm currently working as a researcher in seed technology at Wageningen Plant Research in the Netherlands. Throughout my academic journey, I have witnessed remarkable scientific advancements and the transformative potential of the new genomic techniques. And recognizing their immense potential and kind of simultaneously feeling frustrated by the current regulation in the EU, I decided 3 years ago to join GeneSpurt Initiative. GeneSpurt Initiative is representing the next generation of plant scientists, early career researchers. And within the initiative, we focus on fostering open dialogue about new genomic techniques and the EU policy surrounding them. We are working on an international scale. We have members across the EU, and we are present across various media platforms. Within the initiative, I'm co-leading policy and advocacy team. Within the team, we are dedicated to promote the responsible use of NGTs and ensuring that our voices, the voices of early career researchers, are being heard in the whole policymaking process. I'm happy to be here today as sort of a voice of early career researchers in the EU, because the current situation regarding NGTs in the EU profoundly affects me and my fellow researchers, both professionally and personally as citizens. And I believe that involvement of scientists in drafting rules and policies is crucial to ensure that regulations reflect the latest scientific consensus, balancing safety and innovation. And I also believe that by engaging with the public and policymakers, we scientists play a vital role in fostering trust and acceptance of new genomic techniques. And this engagement enhances the competitiveness of researchers and creates more opportunities for us in the evolving field. And I hope that policymakers will recognize the urgency of adopting new genomic techniques and also be more open to communication with scientists. As a young researcher, I find the current regulation in the EU, which treats NGTs and GMOs, very frustrating, because the strict rules slow down progress, make it hard to get funding and perform field trials, because governments and investors are hesitant to support projects if that means that the research stays in the lab and does not move into a practical application. This, of course, slows pace of innovation in the EU. And currently, we are seeing that the changing the regulations in the EU is very tough and slow process. And what that means for European researchers is that it's really hard to compete globally because we see that other countries with more relaxed rules are advancing faster. They are attracting talent and investment that could come to Europe. This also limits job opportunities for young researchers. And we hope that if regulations were more supportive, Europe could lead in scientific innovations in agriculture, and there could be more career opportunities for us to stay at the forefront of agricultural innovation. With this being said, I'm very looking forward to contributing to, well, our discussion today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I'm going to stick with you for a moment, though. And so, can you give me an example of, are there researchers that you know that are either moving overseas in order to pursue their research interest, or have technology that could be relevant, but they're not able to take it either to the field, or if it's in the field, they can't take it to the farmer? So, give me some real world examples of people's lives who are impacted by these decisions.
Yeah, I mean, for example, what I have seen recently from my colleagues in the UK, well, now the UK is a bit moving forward and there are field trials because, of course, they now have their own regulations. And I do see my fellow colleagues that are still in EU thinking about how their career is going to be affected if they want to stay here and pursue their research. And of course, there is a lot of talking about going overseas where there are more opportunities to pursue this research, because here in Europe, there are very few field trials that are there with CRISPR crops, and it's really hard to actually get a permit for those. And we've seen last week that rice trial in Italy was destroyed, which was very sad and frustrating news for the whole scientific community, I would say. So yes, I do hear a lot of talking about going overseas, going to the countries where the rules are a bit more relaxed, but also, you know, this whole destroying field trial in Italy really felt like an attack on the scientific community in a way.
Yeah, and you also raised the point about communication. And for me, communication is everything. How we talk about issues can either bring people together to solve problems, or it can actually polarize the debate and make everything more difficult. Uh, so communication is really critical because ultimately science tells us what we can do, but the public tells us what we should do. And we need to engage with the public and policymakers so that they have the confidence to allow us. And so it sounds like um, some of the young researchers have sort of gotten that message, and they're not sort of waiting for people to tell them what can happen, but you're actually out there trying to engage in these conversations and shift these dialogues yourself.
Yeah, I would say that it's very important for me to have this dialogue, and I have been very happy to see that in the past few years, more and more scientists are getting involved. Because, I mean, in the end of the day, we are paid by the taxpayers' money. So I feel like we owe to the general public to actually talk about our research. And when it comes to NGTs, it's so important to listen, because I understand that everyone concerns have a sort of a reason why they are there. So it's so important to listen and to understand where those concerns are coming from, not just go there and try to educate people. So what my initiative is trying to do, and what I think all scientists should do, is really have a dialogue, not trying to educate, not trying to have like a lecture to for other people, but really to engage in a dialogue, to hear the concerns and try to address them with the facts that we know from our research. But also then on the other hand, engagement with the policymakers. Those are people who make rules for all of us, for scientists, for citizens. So if they are not completely informed about the new genomic techniques, about their potential, their limitations from scientific point of view, how can they make informed decisions? So I think that engaging with diverse stakeholders is something that we should all be willing to do, and that we should all prioritize in this whole dialogue encompassing new genomic techniques.
Now, bringing others in, um, give me a sense, this may be for Jim or for Christina. How long does it take to bring a traditional variety to market? How long does it take to bring a new GMO variety to market? And how could these new novel genomic techniques change the game? Jim, you want to take a first crack at that?
Yeah. I was going to say, out of a breeding program, it really depends on the crop and things like that. You know, it used to take over 10 years to get a variety to market. Now it's probably less than that because of some of the newer techniques that people have been using, some genetic markers and fast advancement of the varieties. So it's taken quite a bit. Now with GMOs, it'll take a little longer than that because of all the regulatory hurdles that have to be accomplished. With NGTs, you can get traits in current varieties. I mean, you don't change the base of the variety. It's still there, but you can add some real value to it in a couple of years, really. So you can make changes very quickly, because you have to understand the targets, of course. You go after those targets and you say, yep, these are the changes I have to make. Changes can come quite rapidly. And again, this all depends upon the species, right? The plants we're working with. Some take longer than others.
So, Christina, let me pull you into the conversation. So, what happens if you don't have access to these new innovations? You mentioned that 5 of the last six years, there's been drought here in the UK. They're dealing with flooding, and so uh, what are the implications for food production in the UK, and what does it mean for the world if Europe can't produce as much food as it does?
Certainly, as I put it in the first place, I would say that denying such a valuable technology, such a revolutionary technology is reckless, is really may have dramatic effects over European farmers, first of all, because very likely they will be soon out of business. They will not be able to continue producing given the current pressures, be those related to again climate change or regulations, because they have to comply with a set of greening regulations, of sustainability regulations. Secondly, Europe is a major food supply at world level. Therefore, there are concerns, real concerns, that if the European Union reduces its capacity to produce food, that would have dramatic consequences worldwide. And that was underlined, I believe, recently in that impact study, the first impact study on farm to fork and its targets. I'm saying because to my knowledge that is the first impact study and was produced by USDA itself. USDA is well aware that if Europe reduces its production capacity, that would have an effect at global level. And let's remember that that was happening before the war in Ukraine, before other major conflicts we are witnessing these days. So increased production costs, less yield, that I believe is the consequence of not embracing, of turning the back to technology, to precision breeding, especially once that is proven that it is safe, it is targeted, it is indeed, it replicates processes that happen naturally.
Thank you. So we already have a lot of questions that are coming in, and so I'm going to turn to that before I come back to some of the questions that I have myself. One of the questions is coming in from David Gould, who's with the Organic Agriculture Association. I think it's great that they're participating, and it's a really good question. There, he mentions that they've developed some guidance on food safety risk related to NGTs, and he's wondering what kind of engagement is occurring with different stakeholders to help them understand the safety of the technology, to understand, you know, why these may be necessary, how it's being promoted. And so you know, what's currently being done to engage with different stakeholder groups. You know, maybe Jim, you know, what are you guys doing with some of the products that you're developing?
We continue to have conversations with a number of potential customers, people who would be utilizing the technology and commercializing it. I've talked to different trade groups myself and talked about technology, because I believe that the most important thing is that people understand what it is, and maybe more importantly, what it isn't. Because as we've said, this will provide the same type of traits and things like that have been created by breeders in the past. They use different techniques, different tools, but it's the same traits that are going to come out of that. And I think it's important for people to understand and know that, because then maybe it becomes a different conversation. But I think education is key, and make sure that people understand, you know, what this is.
Yeah, and I would say conversation as well as Patricia, because it needs to be a two-way communication. So somebody asks, are there any commercially introduced crop varieties with gene editing or with these new genomic techniques? Um, I don't think the regulatory path exists currently in the EU for that, but are there some examples people can give from around the world? And I mentioned Japan earlier, and there are two products that were brought to market. There was a sea bream, which is a fish that had that grew faster and produced more edible meat for the product. And then there was also a tomato that was a heart healthier tomato that came to market. So it had a real consumer trait to it, and they're available in just regular stores. But are there some examples that anybody can provide that would help the audience to understand, what does this really look like in practice?
Well, I think the one which is maybe been talked about the most and done pretty well is from Pairwise, were some of the healthier greens that they had developed. So you have a little bit more quality in your salads. I mean, it's a small step, but it really is something that will add some value to the consumer.
Any other examples people want to throw out, or maybe give a couple more examples of things that are in the pipeline that are particularly exciting? So I had a chance to visit some field trials in the UK. They were mentioned earlier, and I saw some potatoes that are um, resistant to late blight, and it's a very important uh, pathogen for potatoes. It leads to extremely high levels of pesticide or fungicide applications, and so has real world potential to both improve the environment, but also exposure to chemicals from producers, but would love to hear if there are others that are out there that people know about.
I
I
mean,
can I can share something about a project, if you want, that is happening in one of the agriculture universities in Romania, in Iași, uh, that deals with wheat, and it's rather about introducing, or the potential of introducing, in the absence of uh, right legislation. We always talk about potential projects, potential outcomes, about introducing some valuable traits from all the relatives of wheat in current varieties. And this is, again, as I said, happening in Romania at the University of Iași. It is really interesting because they have a very broad gene base, and they can work on different combinations. And it seems to be growing recognition among breeders and farmers that valuable natural traits have been lost in both conventional and organic crops. Therefore, there is a huge potential given the right environment and regulatory framework.
Go ahead, Patricia.
yeah, I
Want to add
mean,
something?
there has been recently what is not in a pipeline, but still sort of on a research level. It's a sort of strawberries with a better shelf life. And also, I know that there is, I think, a startup in the UK working on non-browning bananas. So that is all more going towards reducing the food waste. Again, something very beneficial for consumers, but also essentially for producers. Like when you have to transport bananas coming from South America or from African countries, of course, you need them to last longer and reduce the food waste essentially.
That's a great point. And food waste is often something that people forget. 30 to 40% of food is wasted. Most of the waste happens post-consumer. And so being able to extend the shelf life is really important. And we don't need more plastic around those products. In many countries, the three most wasted food items are bread, potatoes, and apples. And so I know that both potatoes and apples are products that one can bring non-browning traits to. And so those could have a real impact on reducing that waste. And that's we all need to be eating more fruits and vegetables. And so it could have a potential knock-on effect of nutritional benefit as well. Could somebody maybe say a little bit more about, the food safety aspect of it? And, I know it's been touched on already, but, why should these products have a lighter regulatory touch than traditional GMOs? And why might it be more similar to conventional breeding? Just somebody wants to tackle that.
I mean, we've heard from EFSA, Food Safety Authority Agency, that basically after they assessed the NGTs, they said that they do not possess any scientific risk that would be greater than conventionally bred crops. So I think that, regulatory agency has done their work. So yeah, that is one point.
Well, the other thing that I point out is that even compared to a conventional mutation breeding program where you create mutations all over the genome, and then you might have to clean it up a little bit, but you might not get rid of all of them. Compare that to a technology where you precisely go in and just change the gene you want to change. And so you're able to quantify the safety much more readily, because if that particular change does not affect the safety and the quality of the food, it should be very easily very easily come to the conclusion that you have a safe product. So keeping that precision in editing is really valuable in maintaining your safe food supply.
Maybe just to add to this, if I can, of course, people ask about safety track record. And I mean, for that, we need to bring those crops outside of the lab. And for that, of course, reaching the stage of the field trials also needs to be a bit more relaxed, in a sense that we can do that, and that those field trials are then protected and not destroyed. Because if you want us to prove a safety record for something that has been out there exposed to the environment, we have to be able to do field trials.
Okay, and in the chat, David Gould suggests some follow-up with the Organic Association on some of the work that they've done, and I think that sounds great. And I suspect that people at ASTA and Euroseeds would be interested, but I'd be happy for you to reach out to me as well if you'd like to continue the conversation. Some others have posted in the chat about low acrylamide wheat trials that are happening in the UK, different trials around the world. So there is a lot happening in a lot of different places. I want to come back to a question that Christina asked about why do we need patents on these products? And I think I know the answer from my conversations here in the UK. I've visited some of the research facilities and that do plant variety sort of recognition in the UK. And so I understand how it works in the UK, but I don't know if Jim, this is something you want to comment on, or otherwise I can say something.
Being able to protect what you develop is important. Otherwise, what happens is you're not able to maintain the funding level you need to discover other products that would be valuable. And so I think it's one of those things that I believe, as I mentioned in my prepared remarks, that as long as the value can be accomplished and shared throughout the growing community and such, that's probably the most important. So they can grow these traits, those traits that add value to not only their growing conditions, but also the consumers can be accessed. And it's simply a matter of saying, hey, I want to be able to, for those traits that I've developed, I don't want to have those walk away very quickly, so that we can have the support for new development and new traits
So,
development.
yeah, but I didn't hear from Christina that she has concerns about plant variety protection. I think she recognizes that there's a need to protect new varieties. I think the question is, why does there need to be a separate protection? And what I've heard in the UK is that when you're trying to establish a new variety, one of the things that you do is you go and you do a morphological comparison of the flowers and the leaves and all of these different things. And the problem with NGTs is that the change is so small that it might not have a morphological difference that can actually be relevant in order to ascribe a new plant variety. It's clearly different because it's got this new gene that does something amazing, but when you look at it, you can't actually look at it and find that noticeable difference. And so it might be, at least in the UK, and again, I'm not as familiar with the European situation, that you might not be able to get plant variety protection for some of these products, and yet we know that they're different. I think that that's the question of, why do they need an added level of protection?
Perhaps to some extent you might have answered the question, because the trait and what it produces is what is valuable. And so you're right, if you have a small change like that, to get it through plant variety protection is going to be probably unlikely. So you do need to be able to say, yes, this trait, which does still add value, and that needs to be protected. So I guess I'm hearing you say about the same thing. Yes, you're right, there's an issue there, but we still have to be able to produce what we protect what we have developed.
Right. Okay. Anybody else want to step in and make some additional comments on that? Otherwise, I can add a couple more questions from the chat. We're still getting some coming in. Let's see. So a long list of different traits have been put in the chat. We appreciate that. And including comments on the regulatory side. Some have raised questions about whether or not it's a good thing to extend the shelf life, and whether or not that's going to be having a negative impact on the quality of the products. Maybe a more general question would be, are there any downsides to having these new breeding techniques, that we might want to be aware of, or we might want to be trying to anticipate? And really, for anybody who might want to go.
Yeah, I think you're raising an excellent point there. And realistically, when you're developing a trait, that trait needs to be vetted, just like any other trait in a breeding program. If somebody says, okay, I've bred a potato that does not brown, that stays looking healthy, looking wonderful and all that, then logically you'd say, okay, that's step one. Step two is, okay, did that affect the flavor, the cooking ability, anything else downstream? And so as a trait developer, you ask those questions as you're developing the traits, and then you say, okay, what other questions do I need to answer to make sure there are no unintended effects there of that trait that I just developed? So I think it is important to be able to do that. And to your point, just saying, oh, I found this gene, I edited it, look, it gives me something, is not everything. We need to still ask the question, is it adding value? But that a lot of times will be answered by the market too. If you put something out there that doesn't meet people's needs, nobody's going to buy it. So it's important for the company to learn that as quickly as possible, so that they're able to put something out there that's desirable.
Thank you for that. And so coming back to the food safety question a little bit, and just asking about off-target mutations. So how do we, how often or how common are off-target mutations, and is it something to worry about? And that could either be for Jim or for Patricia, but Christina, of course, is welcome to jump in if she has any thoughts.
I mean, maybe what Jim already mentioned before, with if you use traditional methods or if you use mutagenesis that is actually exempted from current regulations in the EU, you often result in many unintended changes. But we know that with new genomic techniques, we actually can make such precise and specific location changes in the DNA that possibility that those off-target effects actually happen is very minimal. Of course, we need to monitor what happens to the crop later on. And this is why I pointed out before, once when you have a crop, bring it out to the field trial, monitor how it behaves in exposed to environmental cues. So I would say that compared to what is there right now on the market, when we compare it to the traditional breeding or mutagenesis, I would say that it's much safer, and the chances that off-target mutations happen are close to none.
Right. Christina, if you had a wish list of traits that you would like to see, I think drought tolerance is probably right there at the top of your list. But are there some other traits that you would be particularly valuable for farmers in Romania? Any comments?
Sure. There are, we first of all, we need increased resistance or tolerance to new or to endemic already diseases and pests. And with the global warming that unfortunately is more increasingly dramatic in this area in southern Europe. We witness this every day, and we also witness in tandem an increased pressure of pests and diseases. We also know that our tools from this toolbox I was talking about are diminishing because a lot of active substances that used to be allowed as phytosanitary treatments are not any longer available to European farmers. And that's another, that would open another chapter, if you want, which is not necessarily the focus of this conversation, the difference between means available to protect their crops, means available to European farmers versus the ones available to their international competitors, so to speak. We need to build resistance and tolerance in plants to biotic and abiotic stresses, as I said. And we have quite a number of diseases and pests recently. Romania, for instance, is used to have a number of derogations, emergency derogations for the use of for seed treatment for maize, especially with neonicotinoid substances, which is not any longer possible. And that's perhaps dramatic because Romania has a pest called Tanimecus. It's a small insect that totally destroys the sunflower and the maize in particular. And this we know that these are two very valuable crops in Europe. And the European market is a net importer, in fact, of both maize and sunflowers. That is just a brief example. Of course, as farmers, we look at agronomic benefits, agronomic traits. we would love to have some consumer benefits as well, but I guess they would come along the way, especially if you are able to have a plant with a built-in resistance to, I don't know what, insect. You don't need to spray, and therefore the consumption of pesticide will decrease.
So we're down to our last few minutes, and so uh, maybe I'll give each of you a chance to just add anything that you didn't get a chance to comment on so far, and then I may have one question depending on how much time we have. But uh, let me just go around and see if Jim or Patricia, start with one of you, have something you want to say in the last minute.
Maybe from my point of view, because we discussed now from Christina's point of view what kind of traits farmers want, they are not always aligned with the traits that consumers want. So I think that there should also be a conversation with farmers involved and consumers involved, that consumers can understand why specific traits are desired by farmers and vice versa, because I think that quite often many people are very detached from the food production. They buy food, but they are not very familiar how that food is produced. So, and again, engaging farmers and consumers in this dialogue is also very, very important.
Thank you, Jim.
Christina brought up an interesting point, because when you talk about, for example, insect tolerance, there is insect tolerance in corn and a lot of different species, but it's fairly complex, fairly challenging to do that. You can find it in related species and you say, I can breed that in. It'll take a breeder 15 years maybe to get that trait into something that's close to being acceptable. One of the things that gene editing is doing right now and is moving toward is the ability to look and edit more complex traits. I know we at Cibus are focusing on that quite a bit, and realize that, maybe the easy ones are behind us. Those are the simple knockouts and things like this that have happened over time. But we've been looking at traits that are much more complex and are developing the tools that will allow us to do that. So we can identify some of these traits that are in wild relatives and say, here's some genes in the target species that we can change and can bring that gene in without the tedious back crossing and all the work that goes along with that. So it is important, but the technology needs to be continued to be developed, and which is why any of these, when we talk about the regulatory and delays and things like that, we need to make a decision, move on, so that we in the development side can say, hey, here's what we're going to go after, and we can go after it with great confidence and speed.
Great. Then Christina, and also just if there's a last comment you want to make about, how we advance this conversation around either plant breeding innovation or novel genomic.
I also believe a lot in dialogue, in civil dialogue, in communication, and I entirely agree with Patricia that we should speak up. We should be in the public arena to talk about our needs and our hopes and our the existing means that the science can develop, can put at our disposal. At the same time, if we don't do this, we'll really lose momentum in Europe, because the world doesn't stop progressing. The world needs to be fed, and there is this brain drain we were talking about earlier from the European Union, which is sad. Researchers from Europe go to work elsewhere to develop plant valuable traits in crops elsewhere rather than in Europe. Europe itself will miss the opportunity to develop its own products, will bring them in, but will bring them not even being aware that some of the products perhaps were developed using precision breeding, using NGTs. And again, farmers and consumers and the society at large, if you wish, will lose in terms of competitiveness. Can we afford this?
And any other last words on recommendations or suggestions on what we can do to advance this dialogue or to move forward the regulatory path in the EU?
Maybe this is a chance for me as a researcher, as a scientist, to really ask policymakers to be more willing to talk to the scientists. And as our attempts have been made in the past from the initiative to reach policymakers, it has been really hard. We have reached very few, and I think it's important that when they make decisions, that they make informed decisions, and for that they should really be more open to engage with all the stakeholders involved, including scientists.
Yeah,
Any last word, Jim?
The communication, as you said earlier, is critical. And, I would encourage anybody who still has questions to talk to people. I mean, we have resources, Euroseeds, ASTA. They can point to a lot of different people that could participate in the conversation and would be happy to talk about the technologies being used and the value that we can expect from them.
Thank you. And so just to wrap up, I think, ending on the importance of communication is important. In many ways, consumers have never cared more nor known less how their food is produced. And because they care and because they're passionate, they're asking for things. But because they don't have as much experience as maybe our grandparents did and others, the things they ask for may not deliver the change that they want. And so these conversations are critically important. I think the current global trading system is not necessarily driving us in the right direction, and that includes on climate change. The current climate rules, if a country doesn't produce any food, then it has no food emissions. I don't think that's accurate. I think if you're importing food, you have a real impact. And so I don't think outsourcing European food production is going to make the world a better place. I think finding ways to meet Europe's food production needs in a more sustainable, nutritious, and equitable way is going to be better for the rest of the planet as well. Very few innovations can succeed if Europe doesn't take a leadership role. And I think that it's critical to find a way because many countries look to Europe for leadership or they look to Europe as a market. And so if they can't export the products to Europe, then they may not get to use them. But I think more importantly, many countries are going to look to Europe to set the rules. They look to the United States in the same way. When the US and Europe are aligned, I think the rest of the world finds it much easier to decide on what to do. And so with that, I would just like to thank our keynote speaker. I'd like to thank our panelists, and I'd like to thank our organizers. But of course, most of all, I would like to thank our participants who gave us this time in their day. It's very important for us to have these conversations. I know that we probably didn't get to all of the questions in the chat. I'm sure that those will all be collected by the organizers. Certainly feel free to reach out to me. But I think that this is a beginning of a conversation. Hopefully it is not the end of the conversation. And so with that, I would like to close the event and thank you all very much.